Um, yeah, I was called in May 2012 to look at a hoarder house in Oakland, California, by this woman named Jean Spinoza. And I'm just going to read some excerpts from this book that I'm working on about it. It's the last chapter of a longer book about. I have a talent for finding things, so this kind of fits in with that. But so we both entered the room, and I got ready to shovel all the materials into the bins, but Jean was standing between me and the bookshelf, looking pensively at the mess of papers and envelopes. It's really sad all these people sent their stuff in and it never was opened. It was for a poetry magazine called the Golden Goose Press, a whole bookshelf full of stuff. She said, picking up a sealed envelope. Here's one from Canada, Jean commented, handing it to me. And here's one from Los Angeles, handing me another envelope. And here's one from Ohio, she said, handing me yet another envelope. Here's one from someone from New Jersey, she said, holding another envelope out to me. I was making a pile of them on a nearby stack of boxes. I was just about to stop her and load all the stuff into the bins by the armload when she handed me one larger, pretty beat-up manila-type envelope and said, here's one from A. Ginsberg in New York. I took it, and she went back to looking at the bookshelf. The envelope was about 9 by 12, brown by color and more so with age. Unlike most of the others, it had been opened and had a tear across part of the front. It was unusual and initially caught my attention because it wasn't addressed to Emerson or the Golden Goose Press. The A. Ginsberg return address was interesting, but it was who it was addressed to that caught my eye. Mr. Neal Cassady, 1047 East Santa Clara Street, San Jose 27, California. Neal Cassady from A. Ginsberg? I exclaimed to Jean. That was the stupidest thing I ever said, although it took me 2.5 years to fully realize it. If you don't know, it kind of turned into a legal shit show after. That's a whole nother story. I write a little bit about that. There were 9 or 10 old Browning pages, and I looked at the date first, December 17, 50, and I read the first line. Dear Jack, to hell with the dirty, lousy shit. I've had enough horse shit. Instantly, when I saw the A. Ginsberg and Neal Cassady and now Dear Jack, I assumed the Jack was Jack Kerouac. Who else could it be? This was the holy trinity of the Beat generation coming at me all in less than 10 seconds. Alan, Neal, and Jack, all there. The letter looked almost as if it had been typed by a crazy person, single-spaced, 9 pages with typing on both sides of the paper. There were almost no margins and little corrections everywhere. It looked for all the world to be the work of a madman. I quickly shuffled through the pages and went to the last page looking for a signature or something to indicate who had written it. There was nothing that could easily put an author's name to it, only some handwritten scrawl and pen going around all the borders of the last page. I also noticed there was a small hand-done drawing of a window on one of the pages that had been typewritten around. It was very strange. I instantly felt this was something very unusual. Jean was standing there, I guess, wondering why I was focusing so intently on this particular letter amongst all the others. So I read out loud the first line, Dear Jack, to hell with all the dirty, lousy shit. I've had enough horse shit. So then time passes, and I get basically cut out of the story completely. And when I protested, this is a letter I got from Jean Spinoza's lawyer to me and my girlfriend, who basically only knew the truth of what had happened. Dear Mr. McQuate and Miss Maley, that's my ex-girlfriend now. This firm represents Ms. Jean Spinoza in relation to her intellectual property matters. This cease and desist order, capital letters, is to inform both of you that your persistent actions, including but not limited to, constant harassing phone calls, emails, and other communications to Ms. Spinoza, profiles in history, the Beat Museum, the press, and others, the involved parties, associated with the Joan Anderson letter have become unbearable and will no longer be tolerated. Both of you are ordered to stop such activities immediately as they are being done in violation of the law. There was no phone calls. There was 2 emails and 2 text messages, but no phone calls. Ms. Spinoza readily admits that Mr. McQuate was present when the Joan Anderson letter was discovered. They shared this experience, and Ms. Spinoza appreciates the assistance that Mr. McQuate provided. This is what got him fired. He got fired right after this. That's what got him fired, because he basically made my case for me. She has mentioned him several times during various press activities, but has no control over how her quotes are edited or presented. In prior communications, from Mr. McQuate, it was stated that Ms. Spinoza owes you something based on the fact that you did not steal the Joan Anderson letter from her. That is, of course, absurd, as the law does not reward people for not stealing. In fact, she had given me the entire lot of stuff, and then when I found the letter, she took it back. So in reality, she stole it from me. If you had stolen the Joan Anderson letter, it would have constituted robbery, and the proper authorities would have been involved. Now Mr. McQuate is stating that Ms. Spinoza told him he would receive 50% of the proceeds from the sale of the Joan Anderson letter. For the record, Ms. Spinoza did not at any point in time state that Mr. McQuate would receive 50% of the proceeds from the sale of the Joan Anderson letter or any other part of Ms. Spinoza's father's estate. That's also not true. We had a signed agreement for 50% of everything. Everything in the estate is 100% owned by Ms. Spinoza, and neither one of you can, under any laws, make a claim to this estate. Any claims you make are without factual or legal basis. Okay, the involved parties. Well, he claims to represent the Beat Museum, the auction house, the press. It's impossible. It's a complete lie. And a cease and desist order can only be issued by a court. So this is just a cease and desist letter. The involved parties have the right to remain free from these activities as they constitute harassment. These remedies, Ms. Spinoza will pursue all legal remedies available against both of you if these activities continue. These remedies include, but are not limited to, contacting law enforcement to obtain criminal sanctions against both of you and suing both of you civilly for damages she has incurred or may incur as a result of your harassment of the involved parties. Again, each of you must immediately stop all harassing phone calls, emails, and other communications of any kind and send me written confirmation that both of you will stop such activities. You both risk incurring some very severe legal consequences if you both fail to comply with this demand, as your behavior constitutes violation of California Penal Code Section 422, punishment for threats, which I looked up and only applies if you threaten to kill somebody or threaten them with grievous bodily harm. Which never happened. And then there's a bunch of other codes he throws out to scare us away. And then, to sum it up, this letter acts as your final warning to discontinue this unwanted conduct before Ms. Spinoza produces legal actions against both of you. This order acts as one final chance for both of you to cease your illegal activities before she exercises her rights. And then he wanted us to sign some things, and then the next day, the lawyer that I got contacted him, and he backed down very quickly. So here's some more from the book that I wrote, from the chapter that I wrote about this. The auction was happening, but this time she was going to be forced to give up 2/3 of the proceeds to the other parties. But she still, through stonewalling and delaying, wasn't going to have to give me squat or even tell the truth. One would think that in a situation such as this, armed with the truth, that they would prevail. I got a sad story for you. That's not really how it works. You might have the truth, but even in a high-profile discovery such as this, even with the truth, try to get anyone to listen. Heck, I had showed up with the truth and a custom-made t-shirt at a preview party for the letter, and some people listened to me, but it didn't change anything as far as the auction catalog or the official story went, and I was still getting the big fat squadoosh. What I learned from this whole saga is the truth is the least important thing. I started out thinking the truth was the most important thing, but the truth didn't matter. The truth had taken a powder and was hanging out in a parallel universe somewhere, maybe having a cocktail at a beachside tiki bar in Antarctica in the 9th dimension. The truth was Schrodinger's cat, floating around in a sealed box somewhere near Oakland, California on the evening of May 15th, 2012. And it would continue to float there because no one, except for 2 people, had looked in the box, and now one of them was refusing to say whether or not the cat was alive or dead, but had retained a lawyer to advise her on what the next best move was. So the truth was neither this or that alive or dead cat. The truth was in an indeterminate state of being neither one thing or the other. The truth was refusing to say anything or respond to repeated calls for comment. The truth wasn't making any comments not approved through the auction house PR department. The truth didn't really fucking matter anymore. If the truth falls in the forest and 2 people are there to see it, one of them will retain a lawyer and sue the other for intellectual property rights to the so-called truth fall. That's the real truth. I realize this is kind of the end part of it, and part of it's an homage. You might recognize it. I realize it's a tired old saw, but if something remains truly relevant, it's not really cliche. It was a classic case of be careful what you wish for that had visited itself upon Neal. Just a few years after he penned the letter that we'd all been fighting about, he was again seriously injured in an accident on the train. Not as bad this time, and in the foot that hadn't previously been injured. Neal saw it as karmic retribution. Since he was off duty at the time, and the train had just left the yard when the accident happened, there was going to be no payout, no settlement. He was just going to lose work and money. Most people would have been devastated and could have understandably sunk into depression. Neal thought it was a hilarious warning not to tempt fate. God is not mocked, he exclaimed from his hospital bed when Carolyn came to visit him. I thought about the expanse of time between Neal writing this particular thing, 15 years before I was even born, and me meeting Allen Ginsberg 25 years before I found the thing that he had lost and then blamed on someone else for losing. I thought about the expanse of land between New York and San Francisco, the impossible distances involved, and how I had crossed them too many times to recount. Sometimes in the seat of a car, a couple of times in a 70s RV, maybe sometimes relying on the combustor sections of the jet engines I had worked on. I thought about the vast expanse of land between San Francisco and New York, and the much less physical distance, but perhaps more psychological barrier to traverse between San Francisco and LA that I had to cross numerous times in the course of this whole thing. The whales and seals and various marine wildlife bobbing in Monterey Bay as I passed over 30,000 feet, being blissfully unaware of the struggle over a few sheets of paper. The last light of the sun fell below the horizon causing the Pacific to shimmer, while Monterey, where Steinbeck walked the streets and alleys along Cannery Row, fell into deep shadows. What would he have thought about all this? If flying, it was Monterey on the right on the way down and Fresno and Modesto on the right on the way back. Fresno and Modesto trading positions for car theft capitals of America on alternate years. Central Valley cities, but in some ways they were much like the Iowa of California, where meth heads cry for meth. In reality, it was only twice I flew to LA and back, specifically in relation to the case, but I'm making it sound like it was more, if you'll indulge me. But I drove there too, supposedly to steal the letter back. That's another story. Which was ridiculous and impossible, but it fits in well with this story. The Grapevine, the last vertical, altitudinal great land bulge before the descent into Los Angeles Basin. Descending into that basin either with the whine of a 737 engines or from a Subaru station wagon in third gear. I thought about those pages sitting on a shelf, one shelf or another for almost 60 years, and I thought of Jack Spinoza, the unknowing possessor of the letter, and in a real sense, the father of all this madness that I never knew. But I also thought of Dean Moriarty. I thought of old Dean Moriarty. Just a name for a character tucked away somewhere in my brain. Being neither exceptionally literary person nor a beat scholar, Dean Moriarty somehow lodged in there previous to May 2012 and had not dislodged until I stupidly blurted out his name. But mostly I thought of old Neal Cassady and what he would have thought about all this, what a laugh he would have had. I thought of old Neal Cassady.